We're very glad to have you and welcome to our Smart Talks series of podcasts. We had the chance to get acquainted about, I think, a year ago, and then in person in Chicago a few months ago. And you've had some changes in your life since then that we're anxious to hear about. So maybe you can just start with introduce us to you and tell us a little bit about you, your background, how you ended up in your last two stops for Honeywell, and then last at SAE's ITC, which is very interesting. So I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. And so I know we want to get to who am I? Am I credible? And am I worth listening to? Right. And so who I am is I'm a country girl. I learned the project management and Rogers rules of order and public speaking before I was 10 through 4-H.
Okay.
And then from there, I went to through high school to Alfred University, which is world renowned for ceramics and glass. But if you don't know ceramics and glass, you probably don't know Alfred. And so it's a small school where the professors are very interested in the students. And through that, I was able to develop a custom degree, dual degree program in geology and ceramics, and also get a co-op program at NASA. And so from NASA, I didn't work on the tiles for the space shuttle, but I worked on ceramics for jet engines. And so it's interesting how threads weave together, right?
Mhm.
And so because I was able to be published in NASA Tech Briefs, I was able to get a job coming out of college working at Eastman Kodak Research Labs with just a bachelor's degree. So during the day, I worked on patents, and in the evening, I went to school for my master's degree. And at Kodak, it was very interesting because I saw three different kinds of technology groups. One was technology that was actively being implemented. So, for example, the beta for the SLM, the Stratasys machines.
The
And
stereolithography. Mhm.
and then from that, I also saw that was being actively implemented. There was another set of technology that was ahead of its time, which was the ceramic superconductors, right? Way out there. You look at it now, you still don't really see it being implemented in an active way. And then there was a third set of technology, which was technology that was ready, but not being implemented. There were barriers. And so that increase in awareness and interest in me to go and look at that further. So I went to a couple of small companies where I got to wear lots of different hats, everything from research to manufacturing to sales. And from that, I was in the sub tier of the supply chain for aerospace and for the cable and harness industry. So that taught me a few more things, right? And then from there, I was able to go to Honeywell, but I was not a logical hire for Honeywell. And reason I say this is there's a supply chain shortage of qualified personnel right now. And so I just kind of challenge people, maybe take a chance on somebody that's a little bit diverse, right? So on the recommendation of some people, my diverse and eclectic resume at that time, they took a chance. I started out real low and I had to learn specs and drawings and audits, kind of almost like starting over. So I say that to people because I also encourage them to take a chance, to be able to try something new, something different. And within 10 years, from the great mentors I had, the needs that were there, I was able to become the director for all of materials and process engineering for Honeywell Aerospace around the world. So my key contribution and what really made a difference was that providing a digital platform that enabled us to connect around the world and manage the supplier approvals in a very coordinated way. And so that was really the key element. So then when I went to SAE, I basically looked to see how I could take those lessons learned
Mhm.
and apply them at an industry managed level. So
Mhm.
there we worked on the standard parts that are used at the aerospace level, right? So it's not just a single company, but across the industry, and implemented a blockchain solution and worked on setting up a consortium for additive manufacturing where people could come together and address a major challenge.
Mhm.
So those are some of the things that are in my background, but I would summarize it with three key points. One is believe that anything is possible.
Mhm.
The other one is be flexible. And the third one is listen with a heart that's really oriented to helping the other person. I mean,
Mhm.
for real problem solving, that's the key, is listening for what is the challenge and having that heart to really help. So those are the three key takeaways.
Great. That's really interesting. You and I both have a lot of international in our backgrounds, and I found that to be super rewarding part of my career.
Mhm.
But I've also found that it forced me to be a much better listener and to simplify the way we speak, because for people for whom English is a second language, you realize you really have to simplify your communications. And so your points resonate with me a lot um, in that regard. So your digital platform at Honeywell is very interesting, and and obviously you took that with you to SAE ITC, and maybe you should explain for a minute, because I didn't understand it, the difference between SAE and SAE ITC, so people understand what role you were playing, because it's really an industry leadership type um, function that SAE ITC plays.
So with SAE, there is a group that has SAE International, which
Mhm.
writes a lot of the standards and is really um, an organization where you work on things as an individual, right? You may be doing it associated with your company, but when you vote on standards, you're doing it as an individual. So then there is SAE-ITC, which is Industry Technologies Consortia. And that is where you work on things as an active vote of your organization. And so it can also do standards like Air Inc. standards, but ITC is like a collection of consortia programs which are each uniquely tailored to
Mhm.
work on a particular segment or issue. So the Automated Vehicle Safety Technology Consortium, for example, is working on automated vehicles. If we're going to be successful in developing automated vehicles that meet the vision of being safer and actually saving lives by having fewer accidents, by providing efficiencies that are beneficial for the environment as well. Just if we are going to see that larger vision, providing mobility for maybe for those who don't have mobility today, like we're disabled, or for people in different areas, there's a lot of potential benefits, but there's a lot of technology challenges. So they are working on how do you actually write the best practices as an industry to
Mhm.
enable that public perception to be worked on, because it takes time for people to become comfortable. But if you look at your cars today, you already have backup cameras, right? So you can start to see where, and SAE wrote the standard that talks about the different levels of automation. So through SAE ITC, we're able to do things like as a consortium and implement them faster with the best practices, and then convert them into standards. So a lot of different solutions. Additive manufacturing is another one that we started a consortium on. So then there's a third arm of the group, which is PRI, which is the Performance Review Institute. And that's actually looking at supply chain for multiple industries. Aerospace is the largest, but it also for medical and for um, the uh, um, the transportation, like for rail and for energy sector as well, and looking at how the control of the process is done. So you can see how these things fit together. You know, you need to have the requirements, you need to have the oversight, and then you need to have a place where people can come together and have the conversations and work on that solution that addresses challenges that are too big for a single company to do by itself. And that's where these groups are important.
Got it. Got it. It struck me that it's like there's association managers that manage various associations, but what ITC was doing was managing industry consortia. So like a safe place to work on things for the benefit of the industry without violating antitrust laws and for things like that. Is that kind of the right picture?
Yes, it is.
Okay. But it's important to say that that's what you were doing, and you've had some changes in your life in the last few months that are very exciting and I'm somewhat envious of, but maybe you tell us what you're up to at the moment.
So I have done what I call a soft retirement. So now I'm kind of like what I would say almost like a free agent, in the sense that I can take these areas that I'm passionate about, solving supply chain type of issues, working on how digital transformation can actually address those in a positive way, and be able to do that at kind of a level where I can just help where help is needed. So I'm retired, and I'm able to just try to share my knowledge and information. Hopefully it's helpful to people, and try to pay it forward. I've been blessed in so many ways by so many great mentors, and I hope that I can be that for others.
Terrific. I understand that feeling and appreciate it. So I think that's amazing that you're able to do that. So we met, I think you reached out to SmartCert, maybe a year and a half ago. And we were quite flattered knowing your background from Honeywell and knowing your background at SAE and being such a technologist. Maybe you could share with us what you saw in SmartCert that attracted you, and why you reached out. That's interesting for us to understand.
So we had been looking at, so let me back up a little bit. Again, alphabet soup, ASPQP, that's the Aerospace Standard Parts Qualification Program.
Okay.
So that's the standard parts or fasteners, electrical connectors that are used across the aerospace industry, but they're managed through industry standards. So having that approved source for who can manufacture those products is important. And because we need to make sure when they're used in critical applications that they meet the requirements, and that they've actually been validated as meeting those requirements. So what we did is we put that information into a database instead of having to open a PDF and read it to see who's approved. Again, going back to the Honeywell days of where you put that stuff in, that information in a database that's visible and accessible so that people can see it more readily. That's what we did. We converted all of that data and we made it available on the web so that people could find it more easily, more readily. But there's another step. We need to connect that data more readily to the manufacturers. So the reason that we reached out to SmartCert is that we were looking at QR codes as one of those ways that would enable the connections to happen more readily. But what I discovered when I talked to Lyndon and to Lonnie was that it was more than that. Okay, it was more than just, hey, you can scan this and you can have this quick connection. It was actually a passion similar to my own of really working at the supply chain problems. And so that's where the conversations really started. And that's how it happens, right? You see something, but then you find that deeper connection, that deeper relationship. And that's why it's important, I think, for people to look outside of their normal environment.
Mhm.
And look at vendors, look at build those different connections, and organizations like the SAE, whether it's the International for Standards or ITC for the Industry Managed Consortia. Those are places where those connections are built, and those kind of that mind sharing happens.
Mhm.
That's a really important element. But that's how we met. Was and part of it was also coming out of COVID. I was just so anxious to be able to go visit somebody local. And so
Yeah.
when I saw this like on LinkedIn, and that they were local, I was like, I wonder if they'd be willing to have coffee, And so it was great. That's how
Well,
we.
good. It's been super helpful for us to benefit from your experience. And um, one of the when Lyndon founded this company, he had been a sales executive for over 20 years. And he got so frustrated that such an advanced industry, an industry that can fill the skies with satellites and hypersonic missiles, would be brought to its knees by literally by paperwork. And when you think about lean processes and getting everything right before you start the process and those type of principles, he knew there had to be a solution here. And when we did some original research, we found, well, that a great deal of the quality certs are exchanged by paper, some are exchanged by email, and some are exchanged by portals, and people have proprietary portals. Um, it sounds like maybe with some of the supplier work you did at Honeywell, that you may have developed some supply chain transparency tools or portals or things like that. Was that part of your scope when you were at Honeywell?
Yes,
Mhm.
very much so. So when I first started, we didn't have anything on the internet for suppliers to see.
Mhm.
We started out simple, and we started with just, hey, let's just put information up there that they can find it, right?
Mhm.
And then the next phase was, okay, well, let's start building some connectivity so that they can actually enter in information. And so when you look at solving some of the digital connectivity, the the challenge that we have with the paperwork, there's two. One is the technology piece, which is actually not so hard.
Right.
It's the mind change. So one of the things that it really took getting people to think differently was um, that this information is has its own architecture. Okay, and once you start to understand that and organize that, then you can get much more out of it. So if you go back to like the periodic table,
Mhm.
think about how much more we are able to do now, because we understand where the elements are relative to each other. And
Mhm.
so that was a key breakthrough, right? If you look at the taxonomy for plants, right,
Yep.
you're able to make some predictions or estimates because you now understand the framework.
Mhm.
So part of the challenge is getting people to understand, for example, that a standard is not just like a book or a novel. It actually has structure to it, and that structure needs to be parsed and connected, and it's used in multiple ways at different parts of the system. And so that piece, it's both having the data,
Mhm.
the understanding of the structure of the data, what's important. You want the right data at the right place at the right time. And then you also need to understand how do you actually work with people to connect it. Because if you say you have to move all of your data, it's all going to belong to me, it's all got to be centralized, and it all has to be formatted exactly this way, that's the barrier that companies are struggling with,
Mhm.
because they've got data everywhere and it's not formatted, and so it needs to have a solution that can actually work on those areas that are common. So it's not like I'm going to take away how you've been doing things for many years, but I'm going to work with you on making your life easier where you're currently at. And so it's taking those steps, which also going back to the automated vehicle example, it's building that time, that comfort level with technology. So if you look at Amazon, for example, Amazon, how have they just kind of made so pervasive? They make your life easy, right?
Yep.
It's hard to not use them when you can find things faster than driving all over town. And they understood that shipping was an issue, right? And so they had the free shipping aspect, right?
Right.
And so they understand the pain points and they implement solutions to that particular element. They don't necessarily do everything all at once, but they come in. And if you look at big software systems, one of the biggest challenges is that I have this customization that I need, but I can't get it because to make a change in that big software platform, I have to get all kinds of approvals, all kinds of champions to sign on for it. So that's why, you're looking for that flexibility, right? And so that modularity, those are some of the things that are important. So we moved, like many people do, from going back to the Honeywell, going back to the ASPQP, similar approaches, right? Baby steps. So first, put it into Excel, right?
Yep.
Then from Excel, okay, what's the next step? Okay, visibility, connectivity. Okay, now I can start to put it into now I understand the structure of what I'm working with. Now I can start to give requirements to an IT software system.
Sure.
Because if you try to design the software system without understanding the structure of what you're working on and what's important, that is where you can run into big IT bills. Right? That's why it's important to pick the right people to work with, people that are trying to solve the right problems in the right way.
Carmen Vertello, who is an advisor to our company, he was a previous guest. He sees that same structure as the future for certifications, that they're free form right now by and large, and there's a lot of common structure that could be there. And he uses the example of MSDS sheets that have a very, very, common structure, which enables them to be stored and referred to and looked up and reused and updated, which is exactly, I think, what you're describing with the standards. I'm curious, Laurie, when you go back to some of the lessons about adopting and moving from, let's say, free form images of data to starting to store data in a more structured way. You talked a lot about the IT portion of it, but there's also the human side of it. And so I think what you were describing, if I got it right, is, baby steps so that you're actually, in the Amazon example, if I understood it, was work on the pain points first. Where's the greatest pain point? And then just eventually over time, migrate the whole process. Did I get the message?
Yes. And so that's where pilot studies and things of that nature can be very important. And it's also, but let me take one other key thought, and that's called TRIZ, which is a Russian problem, TRIZ, which is Russian problem solving. And so people are afraid to give up certain things. And so they think they have to compromise. What I really like about the TRIZ approach applied to business system thinking, because it's a technical problem solving, but when you apply it to business thinking, how can it be both and? Not an either or, not a compromise, lesser than for everybody, but how do you actually look at things and separate them spatially, temporally, and functionally? And so when you do that, then you find ways that you can actually start to solve the problem without creating that conflict, right? So look, if you, for example, spatially, you might solve it for this particular plant as a pilot study. And then from based on that lessons learned, then you can expand it out to other facilities, right?
Yep.
You can look at it functionally. You can say, okay, functionally, my biggest pain point is this receiving from this particular supplier, right? And so I'm going to look at receiving first. I'm not going to try to do everything, but I'm just going to look specifically at receiving, right? And so those are, or if you're a small company, it may be, I just want to look to start with at the actual sending of the information, because I'm tired of my customers calling me up and saying they can't find my information, right? I sent it to them 3 times already, right? How can I send it to them that they won't lose it this time, right? And so that's the kind of thing where if you separate it, and you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, right? But that is how you can really start to find approaches that you can sell to management. Because another challenge may be not invented here. Okay, so it may be, that's so simple. I mean, when we looked at the software, it's like, oh yeah, we could do that. But the question is, okay, I'm not an artist, but I like to be artistic and creative. When I go to a craft sale, I see all these things and I don't want to buy the art because I'm like, I could go home and do that, but will I do it?
Right.
And do I have everything I need to do it? And will it be as cost effective? And will it look as nice when I'm done with it? It would be fun. And a lot of IT departments can end up being like that.
Yeah.
Can end up saying, oh, well, I could do that. But by the time they do it, you might have already been well down the road. And it's, again, focus. If you're going to spend all your time on it, then you become, that's your interest, and you're going to be an expert at it. If it's just one of many things and it's the lesser important one, they may never get to it. And so that's where it's really important to be able to say, this is the benefit that we're going to see. It's small, it's not a big thing, but I'm going to prove to you the benefits. And when you do that, then you're able to build credibility and eventually go to where it's a global solution.
You sound like you speak with authority on that topic. Do you have any examples of where you've encountered that, or where you went down the path to building something and then recognized, oh gosh, maybe maybe we shouldn't have?
Yes, I think so that can happen with some of the original concepts, like with Honeywell, right? It took 8 years before there was readiness for the concept, right? And so there's also situations where, like in terms of coming up with the software solution for the ASPQP. In terms of being able to make that more connected, as I mentioned, we could look at having developed that software capability, but it's better to look at what is off the shelf or available and start there. So, simple things. It's better to not. It's good to have a big picture. Then to take it down a level and start looking at where can I start working it, right? And that's the key.
Well, one of the things that we've learned from our customers and prospects is that portals are very effective for the person who's the portal owner, but it's a zero-sum game because it becomes an inconvenience for the person who has to access it, or a company that has to access 30 different portals for all of their customers or their vendors. And one of the things that we've learned along the way that we didn't really understand as important upfront was the neutrality of being an independent provider. We don't really care anyone's platform. It enables us to exchange between ERP systems or QMS systems and proprietary databases. And it's been an advantage for us. And obviously, we think there's a network effect here, particularly within certain industries, that we'll get to a critical mass and there'll be enough vendors and customers on it that the more people that come on it, the lower cost for everyone. And while the benefits of having a network effect at scale are tremendous, they work against you at the beginning. So it's very important to get people on board, right? No one wanted to buy the third fax machine, or
Right.
and so it's a great challenge, and it's really fun to interact with the visionaries who completely see that and embrace it. And so we really enjoy that. But I'd like
And
to go back. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
so I remember a particular conversation with a fasteners distributor.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were looking at connecting with the ASBQP, that's the certification database.
Yep.
And one of the things they said to me really stuck with me. It was, we're big enough, we can program our interface to take your information. But what are you going to do for the smaller suppliers? And how are you going to be able to have them get the information they need for their capabilities? Because they don't necessarily have the IT department to go and build a custom connection.
Sure.
So that's exactly what you were speaking to, is that larger corporations can do this customized, but they have to kind of think about their supply chain and where their supply chain is at and their capabilities and what is available to them that is affordable and cost effective.
Right. I think that also is one of the reasons why you don't, while blockchain can play a really important role in chain of custody, or when you need to have a ledger or security. One of Lyndon's visions in founding the company was, hey, that we exchange paper today by and large. And so if he felt like if he had to go in and explain blockchain, I hope I said blockchain earlier, not Bitcoin, but if they had to exchange blockchain to small business owners in the supply chain, it was going to be an uphill battle. And we see a role for it. I mean, there's clearly a very important role for it in our roadmap, but we needed to meet the industry where it is today. And that's one of the things I think is key to adoption of any technology, is not forcing people to take too big of a step. You referred to that with the baby steps. But I'd like to go back. You talked a little bit about pain points and starting with pain points. And you've had really a unique position as with SAE ITC, kind of a catbird seat, to look into the industry and see where are the greatest pain points for the aerospace and other industries. And maybe you'd share with us, like, as you look for the next couple of years, where do you think are the greatest pain points that can be solved in the supply chain?
So one is, I think, the cleansing of data. Okay, because one of the biggest, whenever you're trying to organize the data, first is being able to categorize it, classify it, know what data is needed where, right? Understand, map the process, map the landscape, understanding, right? But then once you understand that, Then the challenge is, well, how do I actually get my data prepped? And that is one of the biggest barriers right now, because anytime you try to put that free form data into an architecture, you're missing a space, or there's a period, or one person said street and another person said st, right? And so when SAE International was developing OnQ, they understood this, and they've done a lot of work to make sure that their system, their platform for the standards, making standards accessible, was going to be able to work with that data.
Mhm.
So organizations that are partnered with people that do machine learning or use AI or algorithms, there's methods and techniques available today, and they're maturing, but that is still, the cleansing of the data still requires labor and manpower. So those creative, innovative people that can come up with ways to address cleansing of data, that'll be very important. The other thing, you kind of talked about this, is the de facto standard approach, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, when we were at Honeywell looking at to convert our standards to digital, I didn't want to go too soon, because so much of the aerospace industry ran on SAE standards.
Okay.
If I didn't know where they were going, I would run the risk of having to do it 2 or 3 times, like some other major players in the industry had done, right? So I wanted to make sure that I was tied in. And that again becomes where it's important to be engaged in with other players, other similar minded people. For example, quality systems.
Mhm.
There's the for engine manufacturers, SAEITC had a consortium that was for the engine manufacturers, which was the AESQ, alphabet soup, Aerospace Engine Supplier Quality. And again, standardizing how the quality system requirements, making it easier for people to understand that architecture.
Mhm.
So just to summarize, it's understanding the landscape, the architecture, understanding what information to work with first.
Mhm.
Then it's coming up with how to cleanse that data so that that can be done in the most cost-effective way. Then the other, a new problem area that I'm introducing now is data ownership.
Mhm.
And the data is heavy. People don't want people to let them into their firewalls.
Mhm.
And so that aspect needs to be addressed. And there are, again, consortia groups working on that from a data marketplace perspective. And that's where some of the technology is maturing, like the blockchain, like working on for digital contracts and so forth. Those are elements. And again, if you look at things spatially, temporally, and functionally, some industries are further advanced than others. So some of these challenges have been worked on and solved by the finance industry. I mean, think about your credit card, your personal finance information. It goes around the world.
Sure.
So what can we learn from those industries, right?
So you think that in terms of supply chain, kind of one of the main, I think there's a tremendous investment around supply chain technology, information technology, and improvements. If I understood you correctly, you're saying that you think that the major challenges are, one, figuring out what data actually can make a big impact. Once you've identified that, figuring out how to get it out of its legacy form and into a new usable structure
Right.
and I know that from years of my life doing ETL between ERP, loads and lookup tables, and it's exactly what you described. And then lastly is once you have a clean and in a structure, ownership and access.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting. Well, those are, they all support this concept of standardization or structure. I mean, all of that leads to that, which is really our vision for SmartCert is having, today we exchange images of data because that's what the industry does. But the next step is there's no reason, the reason we exchange images of data is because there's signatures on the certificates. And today we have digital signatures. So the next step is instead of exchanging, if we can get structures in place, instead of exchanging images of data, we can exchange data. And then once we can exchange data in digital certifications, now we can unleash machines to do what they do best. And in fact, our tagline is we're taking the paper and the work out of paperwork so humans can do what they do best. And that's our vision for the future. So what you just described actually lines up. It's nice to hear you say that because it lines up with our vision. You and I have been around the industry for a while, and we've seen technologies win and lose. And I'm curious from your perspective, Laurie, as when you think back where you started at Kodak in NASA, and what you see in the industry today, what do you think has had the biggest impact on materials engineering and aerospace engineering processing and manufacturing that you've seen over the years?
So I'm biased because I'm a materials and
Yeah,
process engineer, right? So I believe everything's made from something by some process,
yeah,
right? So um, material breakthroughs.
yeah,
So for example, you're like the cell phone, right? Think about how that has just transformed our daily lives because it's
yeah,
easy, portable,
yeah.
right? That was, when I was in kindergarten and they came in and they did a display from Corning Glass Research, and they said someday you'll be able to see the person that you're talking to, right? Like we're
Yeah,
doing right now,
yeah,
right? I mean, that was not conceivable. What had to happen? Fiber optics had to come, right? You had to have the digital computer technology. So you need the materials. So imagine if we actually get a lightweight portable energy source and all these challenges that we're having,
mhm,
all these controversies over different energy supply systems, right? If you actually did find that battery or
mhm.
portable power source, right, or green fuel, right?
Right.
These are things. So that's a major opportunity. What keeps things from being successful? Cost,
Yeah.
right? Um, Awareness, not being able to find it, connect people, right?
Mhm.
And then the other one is just resources, right? So there's a lot of technologies that are out there, but it's like two gears turning. The two cogs have not come together yet.
Uh-huh.
Once they do, then you can unleash a lot of, you hear things about supercomputing and quantum physics, and
Sure.
those are going to happen. Um, but the virtual reality, some people are starting to clump everything that's virtual into what they call metaverse technology.
Right.
I'm not sure that I necessarily like that term. The internet didn't start out as the internet; it was a World Wide Web, right?
Mhm.
So but there's those elements of the computing power that are going to require new materials, new processes, and those are going to be key. And so some other barriers. What happens if we can't get the raw materials needed for chip manufacture?
Sure.
What happens if we don't have the magnetics we need? It could be the same thing that happened when we couldn't get out of our homes and we invented new ways, or we just utilized technology we already had to
Mhm.
connect virtually, right?
Yep.
And so there's solutions that may already exist, but the threat or the demand hasn't been large enough. So that's one of the questions is there's a lot out there, but if the problem isn't big enough or the threat isn't big
Yep.
enough, if people are too comfortable doing what they're doing, then they may not adapt the technology unless it just makes their life
Yeah.
easy. And then it's got to creep in. The ease has to creep in. So it's either big moonshot kind of challenges
Mhm.
or it's subtle kind of like water kind of coming in from a spring, filling up a spring that comes in easy. Your life just gets easier and
Yeah.
you start adapting it because it's just easier to do. But all of those things require materials or process improvements.
Yeah, when you talk about Corning, I mean, just think about Gorilla Glass. Like 20 years ago, who could have imagined you'd have a big plate of glass on the front of a phone that can survive what it survives? Keys in
Right.
the pocket, drops, temperature. I mean, everything a phone happens. You're right. And I've also heard you refer to, moving on to your next comment, you refer to activation energy, and that's kind of what you're talking about. Like there's a certain level of effort that has to go into making a technology like start to roll out. And I think you're right about COVID forced us and just had a dramatic change in virtual. It also had a substantial change on small and medium-sized businesses, which have
Mhm.
historically been kind of a cemetery for new technology, and they've been isolated. Um, but when people had to start working from home, uh, that accounts for tremendous growth and things like, I don't know if you're familiar with Bill.com, but it's like they handle accounts payable. So
Mhm.
instead of your vendor sending them to you and you processing it, you send it to your email address at Bill.com. They scan it in. They know exactly what accounts it goes to because they've seen that invoice before. And then they know your vendors and they'll take care of the payment for you. Well, they've gone from 60 million to 600 million. And a lot of that was driven by the fact that they do save money and people do save money in the process, just the standard digitalization argument. But when COVID hit and the people had to start doing it from home, boom, it launched it. And
Mhm.
we saw the same thing in small and mid-sized supply chain companies because they always had a full staff. But now
Mhm.
you could do certs remotely, or now you could do like your accounts payable remotely, or access your ERP system. And so that's been a change, and not to mention the difficulty hiring people. And the younger generation does not want to work only with paper, and particularly customers. They want to access their information via multiple channels. I think the ideal is someplace around four, and four different channels is what they like: phone, text, email, and a platform of some sort, for example. Um, we've also seen like one of the ones that I see it because we have a lot of distributors who are customers, and they're really in take fastener distributors that sell a product that by definition is commoditized. So
Mhm.
they're interchangeable with someone else's fasteners. Now competitive differentiation becomes a really, really important for them.
Right.
Um, and they're under threat from direct to customer, because manufacturers can now put up e-commerce sites and drive that down. And so there's a statistic, I think in 2019, of the distributors under $100 million in the United States, 13% had e-commerce. But by the end of 2022, I think 37% did. So almost triple the adoption of e-commerce in mid-sized distribution companies in the United States. So um, necessity is the mother of invention, I think, is the short version of that. Um,
But I think one key element is we can't take the human factor out.
right. Cannot.
And so going back to like how I actually called up Smart Cert was because they were local.
Yeah.
I could talk to them. I could build a relationship with them. Now they're bigger and there's more parts to it, like us talking here in Chicago
Yep.
and so forth. But so relationships are still key. And so again, it goes back to what will make a difference for people is not only the technology solution being easy and simple,
Mhm.
but also those that bring in that human relationship piece.
Mhm.
That's a key, right? And so, people who are listening and really have the heart to solve the problem, and that's I think that's one of the reasons why that, I feel very positive about Smart Cert and what you're doing is is that you're looking at what why are you working on this? And then the how with the element of how does this make life easier for people?
Mhm.
You're coming back to it's not just like this cool fancy technology.
Yeah.
It's about that heart to make things easier for the person who's handling all that paperwork, right? And so I think that that's and for if you look at like the finance systems now, Zelle or things like that on your
Sure.
phone, right? So you don't even need to be in your office anymore. It's portable, it's digital, and so I mean that's the more that we look at how people and one of the things is the apps, right?
Mhm.
And being able to kind of do a pilot or try it and then you can upgrade, right? It's modular. You can determine, okay, I like this part of it, but and it's also competition, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's a really important aspect too, is having being able to connect, like you said, to different ERP systems or PLM systems or different software tools that people are using is
Mhm.
another key element.
Yeah, that you raise a question that we had previously discussed, and that's that w- when I hear people talk about the supply chain, there's tremendous technology out there, and particularly in terms of logistics and all that. And we're trying to deal with this quality side of thing, and there's a lot of compliance. Um, but going to your point about relationships, I think you raise a really good point. I've heard people say that the constraint, if you will, in that whole process is the relationship and the communication and the collaboration between suppliers. So everybody has their own optimized solution for within their four walls,
Mhm.
but it's the connection between them. Does that resonate with you? Is that I've heard people say that. I don't have enough experience to know whether it is or not, but I'm curious how you respond to that comment.
So it goes back to that not invented here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to develop trust. And so, I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's Speed of Trust. Um, and I think that there's a lot that happens there. And again, when you have groups of people that how do you bring people that are afraid of having the way they do things changed?
Mm-hmm.
How do you bring them together and get them to work on a solution? If you do it top down, they're not going to want to buy into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are times where you have to do that, but if you can, to engage people as part of that process,
Sure.
and then provide a looking at it to find an area where it's not like you're going to say, well, your standard doesn't work for me, you've got to do it my way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's actually saying, okay, well, there's this interconnection area that you keep doing things your way, you keep doing things your way, but let's talk about how we're going the interface between those two.
Yeah.
And when you work on that interface, then you're working on that ability to resolve differences and
Mm-hmm.
provide solutions. And then they start to say, oh, well, I now know you, I trust you more. And I start to see that if I made this change in my system, it would actually make this easier.
Yeah.
And so then they make the change because it's their idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's important. And then going back to things like the distributors, That's really where they sit. They are that interface.
Yeah.
They are, it's not just about moving products, but they are a relationship managers between organizations.
Yeah.
And so understanding what they do, it's sort of like the car companies, instead of looking at themselves as car manufacturers, start to look at themselves as transportation specialists,
Hmm.
right? And so it's about more about the why are they buying cars? They're buying cars to get somewhere. Why are they trying to transfer data, right? And
Mm.
so when you look at it more around the the that part of it, I don't want to say, I think sometimes we get too carried away with the service industry. Again,
Mhm.
materials and process, everything's made from something,
Yeah.
right? We can't lose our manufacturing strength,
Right.
you know, but services are important, right? And so, but it's making being able to take the physical and the digital and bring them together that's really important.
Right. Which brings us back to the very beginning, which was the QR codes.
Exactly.
So, um, Laurie, great conversation. Is there anything that I'm excited? I understand you're going to Alaska. I'm very excited about hearing about that when you get back. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, or questions of me, or that we should have talked about while we're on this topic?
No, I just maybe just to kind of encapsulate all of it because I
Sure.
have a tendency to wander. Um, the what is important is, again, that problem solving, spatially, temporally, functionally. And what I've seen Smart Cert do is address each one of those,
Hmm.
and to do it in such a way that it kind of enables the connections to happen. And I think that's why you're seeing the rapid growth, because you're looking at how do you actually help a particular group. I've heard so many positive things about the onboarding process because it's personal, it's working with people, and it's really looking at how to make their lives easier. And so the technology is great, got to have that, but without the relationship piece, and you have that, you're working that very well. So
Well, thank you. We do view this as a community, and um, we've been working on, kind of creating our brand and our brand description, and that which helps for hiring, and it comes down to really authenticity and being genuine and real people and vulnerable. I mean, that's why people like to work with people. Um, they're professional. You can help them with the solution, but it's very comforting and um, reassuring to hear you say that, because we do believe it's both. You can't. It's certainly the technology can't stand on its own. So super nice of you to say that. And thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today, Laurie. And I'll look forward to hearing about Alaska and continuing our discussion when you get back.
okay. Thank you.